Si vous désirez écouter le webinaire en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton Interpretation au bas de votre écran et sélectionner French. Bien que vous ayez choisi l'option d'interprétation en français, vous entendrez toujours les conférenciers et conférencières en arrière-plan, en anglais. Pour n'entendre que l'audio en français, veuillez cliquer sur Interpretation FR et sélectionner Mute Original Audio. Ces consignes se trouvent aussi dans le chat. Merci et bon webinaire.
Thank you very much, Mel, for those instructions. And let me welcome everyone to Frontier College's National Forum on Literacy and the Economy. I think you'll agree it's a very timely topic. We hold a forum every year to take a look at the connection between literacy and other things. And certainly lots in the news about both learning and about the economy these days. We thank you very much for attending. I'm really happy to say there's about 535 of you, which I think is just spectacular. So thank you for joining us. My name is Stephen Fall, and I have the real privilege of serving as president and CEO of Frontier College. I'll tell you a little more about us in a moment, but first, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. And this is not something we do as a matter of rote. It's not part of the housekeeping ceremonies particularly, but rather we value our partnership with Indigenous peoples very much. We have a presence in partnership with probably over 100 Indigenous communities throughout the country, and those are very important relationships to us. So with that in mind, I'm in Scarborough, Ontario today, and I want to acknowledge that this land for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I will also begin by thanking a funder. This forum is funded in part by the Government of Canada's Adult Learning, Literacy, and Essential Skills Program. And I also want to give a shout out to a former funder, Canada Life. They were the founding sponsor of the forum and the concept. So before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. The panelists will be speaking in English, and a few seconds ago, Melanie explained how to access the simultaneous French translation. So I believe you can reach out via chat and ask any questions if you have. And I will remind myself mostly and my fellow panelists that the translators are listening to us and translating as we speak, so try not to go too terribly quickly. I have a terrible habit of speeding up as I go, and so I will endeavor to remember that as well. Everyone turning in today has been automatically muted. If you want to ask a question, you can do so in the little Q&A box down to the bottom of your screen there. And we will have about 30 minutes following the panel discussion for a question and answer period. You can also email us at literacy@frontiercollege.ca, or you can tweet your questions to @frontiercollege. Just an FYI, the session will be recorded and that'll be available on our website. So if you're enjoying the webinar and you think someone else might want to hear, by all means, point it out to them. Just for your knowledge, though, only the panelists and myself will be shown in the recording. You won't be. So let me just say a few quick words to introduce our topic. As you may know, Frontier College is a long-standing national literacy organization. I'm proud to say we've been at this for 121 years. We have work going on throughout the country, quite literally coast to coast to coast. And everywhere we are, we offer free programs to help people who are struggling with low literacy. Now, I know many of you who are joining us today already know that literacy is a significant issue in Canada, but it's surprising there are a number of people who don't. So let me just set the stage. There's a lot of data I could share, but I think a really compelling piece of information for me is that nearly 1 in 5 Canadians has a very low level of literacy. And that's really critically important because literacy connects to so many other things. I mean, we're going to talk about how it connects writ large to the economy today, but it also connects to other things, income and housing and healthcare. Not everyone realizes that. We know that a person is more likely to have an adverse health outcome if they have difficulty accessing healthcare information. And just think about the last 19 or 20 months we've gone through, all the occasions when you've had to read a protocol or sign a form or fill out something to do with your health. Imagine how difficult that would be, and imagine the consequence of error if you didn't understand every couple of words. So I could share a lot more data and statistics, but I think the simple reality for millions of people is that improving their literacy is the key to a brighter future. And I will just add that our work collectively, all of us who are gathered who work at literacy, is more important now than ever before. The pandemic has created interrupted education, and we know that's a contributing factor to poor literacy. In fact, research by UNESCO, by the University of Alberta, and our experience and the experience of many of our partners is showing that people who were struggling with literacy before the pandemic are going to be struggling more than ever now. And UNESCO went on to say that this has the potential to impact their ability to learn or to earn for the rest of their lives. So over the next hour or so, the panel will be talking about the issue. And we're really fortunate to have excellent panelists with us every year. We're so pleased with the panelists we gather. And I will just say a quick word of introduction for all of them. When I'm done introducing you, maybe I could just ask the panelists to say hello or wave so that the people attending know who you are. And when you had an opportunity to sign up, and when you're on our website, there was extensive biographies of everyone listed. So I won't go through all of that information because you can read it, but I will just say that we've got great folks, and I'll just share just a little bit about them. So first of all, Melanie Vincent. Mel is Vice President of Programs and Impact at Frontier College. Originally from Quebec City, she's had the privilege of working in every Canadian province and territory. I doubt there are very many people who can say that. So when you give your comments today, Mel, I'm sure you'll be drawing on experience from literally throughout the country. Through Frontier College, she's worked with local and national partners and numerous First Nations and Inuit institutions to develop youth engagement, community education strategies. She's worked with various industries to deploy workplace essential skills development programs across the country. Mel, do you want to just say a word of hello?
Bonjour, hello. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Thank you, Mel. Now, we also had in your program, if you will, Shivam J1. Shivam hasn't actually joined yet. There's probably some technical problem. There's always some technical problem when you do something live. That's okay. I'll come back and we can introduce him more formally when he joins. I'll skip along to Annie Montague. Annie is a Frontier College staff member. She promotes community learning with respect to the increasingly interconnected and complex world we find ourselves in. Her role as community coordinator for the lower mainland of BC involves partnering with local organizations to support educational programming for children, youth, and adults facing multiple barriers. So you can say hello, Annie.
Hi, everyone. It's with deep gratitude that I am calling in from the traditional, ancestral, and unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
Thank you very much, Annie. And I should have mentioned a special word of thanks to Mel, who I introduced a moment ago. It was only an hour ago that Mel realized she was going to be an esteemed panelist. We had someone who had a health program, and so a health problem that is. So anyway, thank you very much, Mel. Our final panelist I'd like to introduce is Craig Alexander. He is president at Alexander Economics View and chief economist and executive advisor at Deloitte LLP. Some of us know Craig from his work years ago as the senior vice president and chief economist at the TD Bank Financial Group. He's got more than 25 years of experience in the private sector as an economist. So Craig, do you want to just say hello?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been a longtime supporter of Frontier College, including a former board member.
Well, Craig, we appreciate all that you've done for the cause. So let's start with you, Craig, since you were mentioning that. Sometimes I note that there's an economist attending an event about literacy. And let me be devil's advocate for a second. Why does an economist care about literacy?
Well, literacy really is a fundamental economic issue, because what you're talking about is the foundational skills that workers need to have so that they can build the other skills that turn into, the trades and occupations and careers that they have. So when we think about literacy, in my opinion, it's the great enabler. It's the foundation upon which you build, more sophisticated skills. And what we know from an economic point of view is higher literacy scores correlate with more likely to finish high school, more likely to go on to post-secondary education, more likely to complete post-secondary education, less likely to experience a period of unemployment. But more importantly, if a period of unemployment is experienced, higher literacy scores actually correlate with significantly less time being unemployed, which actually makes a lot of sense, right? And we're currently living in a world where skills demand is constantly changing, and people with stronger literacy skills have greater ability to do continuing education. They have more scope to change their skill set as labor market demand changes. So from a point of view of Canada's labor market, this is really critical. And when you look at what is Canada's big comparative advantage over many other countries, it's the very highly educated, highly skilled workforce we have. So in other words, it's our people. And what we can see in the data is people with higher literacy skills tend to earn more. They also, from a business point of view, there's a lot of reasons why businesses should care about this issue, because what we can see is workers with higher literacy skills have lower error rates. They're more likely to, more ability to on-the-job training. It leads to better team performance. It often leads to higher productivity, like times per task. And because there's all those business benefits, you also get large economic benefits, both to the workers and to the economy. So the modeling I had done when I was at TD showed that if you brought the level of literacy up to the desired level in a modern, advanced, highly digital economy, you would create around 800,000 more jobs. Well, given that the labor force has grown since when I did that analysis, I wouldn't be surprised if the number is closer to 1 million jobs today. And it increases productivity. So for every 1% increase in literacy scores, we see a 1.5% increase or a 2.5% increase in labor productivity. And that was something that Statistics Canada had estimated. And what that actually means is if we took the people with very weak literacy skills and then people that have, have literacy, but not at the level that correlates with really strong employment outcomes, you could add close to $100 billion to the Canadian economy, right? And so we're currently trying to struggle out of a pandemic. What we're seeing in the labor market right now is the majority of businesses are experiencing labor shortages, and the labor shortages are not necessarily, where in the sectors where the employee has become unemployed. So there's a skills mismatching that's happening right now today. That there are jobs without people and people without jobs. And when you start to think about this from a skills point of view, ultimately the being a high skilled worker, a semi-skilled worker requires good literacy scores. So when Stephen mentioned that at the start that I think it was 1 in 5 Canadians have very, very weak literacy scores, I think we need to keep in mind that really what we're talking about is a skill set that's a spectrum of proficiency, right? There's people that have problems reading just basic, filling out forms and reading basic materials. There's then a lot of people that have literacy skills in English or French, the official languages, which is actually still holding them back. And in many cases, those individuals won't even feel like they have a literacy problem, right? What they don't appreciate is is the opportunity that stronger literacy skills afford them, right? So this is truly an economic issue.
Well, Craig, thank you. So some pretty big numbers you just shared there, $100 billion to the economy, if I heard you right.
Yep.
And you're quite right. There's a range of people who struggle with literacy. The number I mentioned includes people who are at what we would call the very low level of literacy. But another compelling number is that just under half of Canadians do have some issues, and perhaps those are some of the people you were referring to who might be able to read and use numbers, but would have some trouble filling out a form, for example. So we've heard a bit about the economic side of it. Annie, let's talk more about the human side of it. Let's just start with maybe just say a word or two about the types of programs you're involved with, and then what are you seeing on the ground in terms of how people are, particularly during the pandemic, how is it impacting their situation? And since we're talking about the economy, how is it impacting their ability to work, et cetera?
Right. So first, I just wanted to say that we're very, very grateful to partner with individuals and organizations in the lower mainland of BC who work unbelievably hard to support our vibrant communities. This past year plus, we have collectively learned to navigate a very dynamic and changing learning environment through the pandemic. And while our communities have experienced enhanced creativity and dedication, and pooled skills and resources to continue making a difference, it's really important to note that we're all continuing to face enormous and often systemic barriers, mostly relating to inequality. So a big one that we talked about a lot last year at the Forum on Literacy and Technology is the inequitable access to internet and technology. So this is a topic that is still very ongoing, even after all of this time and all of the transitions that have happened in the past year. But the societal shift to accessing services has, on one hand, provided increased flexibility. A lot of our programs that we're running in person are now able to run online, but it's mostly highly skilled workers, community partners with the capacity to move online, learners that with internet at home that are benefiting from these new technologies. So on the other hand, it's also created an even bigger barrier for individuals and families to navigate. The online world is predominantly English mediated. Internet and hardware and software is, when not accessed in a public space, is expensive and can be a financial burden. Many folks don't have reliable resources such as classes or workshops or even family members to support digital literacy learning. And then we've also, we've noticed this as a significant impact amongst elderly populations and newcomer populations, but it truly spans all age and demographic groups. One of the programs that we're currently partnering with is specifically geared to support adult literacy learning with digital technology. We're partnering with the Burnaby Neighborhood House to create a new position that specifically is meant to support the programming that is happening at the physical location, and then going out into the community and providing support to people that aren't aware of how to access this digital support. In addition to that, there's also increased job precarity and inequality. A lot of entry-level jobs are consumer facing, paid lower wages with a higher risk. And during the pandemic, I know that we've had learners had to stay home from school so to watch their siblings so that their parents can go and work some of these jobs, which not only puts their families at health risk, but it also puts the children at risk for falling behind in school. All of this is, not to mention all of the health and mental health detriments that have happened this past year with increased stressors, burnout, just continually living with uncertainty in many facets of life.
So Annie, you raise a number of points there, and I think we'll probably come back and look at some of them. Mel, let me turn to you. You had the opportunity to hear the conversation. One thing Annie mentioned was the challenges people might have accessing programs online. And I know that to just casually take a look at the situation, someone might say, well, people aren't able to meet in person or not like they used to, but they can do it online. Is that true for everyone? What are you seeing, and what do we do for people who might have trouble connecting?
This is a very important question, Stephen. What we've noticed at Frontier College, again, how Annie, you mentioned this earlier, is that we actually, when the pandemic hit, we actually lost contact with a lot of our learners. We were able to rebuild this contact, over a few weeks and months. But with some of our learners, it was impossible to be able to rebuild the contact through internet. Either because people didn't have access to the hardware or to an internet connection. For example, you were mentioning at the beginning of the forum, Stephen, that we work in partnership with a lot of First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities. That's just one example of some of our partner communities where normally we have a lot of programming happening in person. When we had to start offering our programs online, it was very difficult for some of our learners in those communities to have access to enough bandwidth to connect through Zoom, for example, or through Teams. So we had to be very creative. We were able to, for example, use phones and or other means to connect with our learners. But still, the question of access is very crucial. And I'm talking about I'm giving this example of our learners that are located maybe in remote areas where there's less access to internet. But we've seen this as well, downtown Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, where we have families, learners, adults and children that didn't have access to, again, either an internet connection that was strong enough, or maybe there was a computer in the home, but suddenly 5 people had to use it at the same time. So it was hard for parents to be able to connect with resources such as Frontier College to be able to offer support to their children. So yeah, to me, the question of access is very a problem that we really have to address to make sure that already that as many barriers can be removed for learners and families that are seeking support.
So what I'm hearing then is a compelling reason why we need to care about this. From Craig's point of view, there's a huge economic impact to a country that has a high number of people experiencing low literacy. And listening to Annie and Mel, it sounds as though there's a huge human element to this as well. People are not accessing services the way they need to. So what can we do about all of this? I think we've established that there's a problem. We know that there's data to suggest there's a lot of people in Canada who need the help. There's a good human reason why we should help them. There's an economic reason why we should pay attention. So what are some of the solutions here? And I'm thinking broadly here, there could be policy solutions. Maybe, Craig, I'll get to you in a moment to ask about the policy side of things, but what can we do? For example, maybe Annie or Mel, one of you can jump in. Are we working with employers? Are employers showing some flexibility, some goals, to some desire to help? Which one of you would like to weigh in on that? Please go ahead, Mel.
Thank you. I'm happy to go. Well, at Frontier College, to us, for Frontier College, every place is a learning place or should be a learning place. So you're talking about employers, Stephen, to be part of. You're talking about employers as parts of important parts of the solutions. They are. I think that employers, governments, the community sector, such as a lot of people that are watching today, have to collaborate together to be able to find long-lasting solutions and efficient solutions. So again, I'll let Craig talk about policy, but in terms of concretely on the ground, yes, we have to make sure that organizations that are reaching people that are more vulnerable or that need to or marginalized, I will say, and that need to improve their skills are also in touch with businesses, so that together we can create very, again, efficient and impactful programs. I have an example of this. Frontier College, at Frontier, we're partnering with the government of Nunavut to be able to offer literacy and essential skills for the trades support to individuals that would like to enter the trade sector. So it's a beautiful project because you have government of Nunavut, Frontier College, which is a nonprofit literacy organization, and many employers of the territory collaborating together so that we can make sure that individuals that have the great goal of becoming a trades apprentice and then a tradesperson can actually acquire the skills that are necessary to enter this sector. I won't go into many details, but we have seen across Canada, just not with Frontier College, but with other organizations, strong collaborations between businesses and the community sector and sometimes government that produce great results.
So that sounds ideal, a partnership involving presumably funders and other partners, businesses, as you say. Craig, I mentioned the concept of policy. You strike me as someone who has your hand on the pulse of policy and things. What can you tell us? What should we be asking for? You know, I had an interesting conversation with a politician recently, a provincial politician, and she said, you know, I go door to door from time to time in an election or what have you, and I talk to people and no one raises this issue of literacy. So why isn't it more important? And maybe you've got some thoughts on that and what we can be advocating for.
Well, first of all, it's a huge topic, right? It's worthy of an entire presentation. But what I'll do is, I think the answer has three different dimensions, right? There's government policy, there's what the private sector should be doing, and then there's Canadians, right? And where you ended that comment really is around the fact that Canadians aren't aware that we have a literacy problem. And I can self-identify with that because when I was asked to do some research in this area, I'm a classically trained economist that spent the bulk of his life in financial services, right? So I hadn't really done research on literacy. You know, lots on the Canadian dollar, lots on where oil prices are going, not much on literacy. So when I undertook the study, what I discovered was that Canada actually does have a significant issue with lower than optimal literacy. And I think part of the problem is people with good literacy skills can't imagine a world without them or a life without them. And they take those literacy skills for granted. And then there are people whose literacy is above the 1 in 5, I think, Stephen, you mentioned, that I actually think that their literacy skills are holding them back, but they don't actually necessarily appreciate the lost opportunities they're having because of their below optimal literacy. And I got myself in trouble one time doing an interview on this topic when I made a comment that I have family members that would be in that category, right? And immediately my family started calling me up, wanting to know which of our family members had suboptimal literacy. So be careful. So I don't think there's public awareness really on this subject because a lot of Canadians take it for granted, and because we have a very well-developed education system, a very high quality education system, they just can't conceive that this is an issue. Now, one way that you can have success in increasing awareness on literacy is actually to talk about literacy in terms of how it connects to some other issues, right? So during this election, or during this pandemic, we had a situation where there was a dramatic increase in the awareness of the shortage of daycare, and that many women were having to leave the workplace during the pandemic because the child care centers were closed. And this then broadened out awareness of how important childcare is. And when you do that, when you broaden it out, you say, well, if you're going to increase investment in childcare, you should take the opportunity to do early learning as well. And that, what that means is that you can actually have the opportunity to build literacy, increase literacy skills for Canadian children, which will pay off, over their lifetime. So, and similarly, when we think about issues like a very common mantra right now is, the goal is to achieve sustainable, inclusive economic growth, and that inclusivity is really about dealing with income inequality and unequal outcomes. Well, investing in literacy that increases the skills that workers have is one of the ways you break down the barriers to opportunity that are holding people back, which is contributing to income inequality, right? So if you think about trying to deal with income inequality, you can do it through taxation, like taxing higher income earners and transferring the money to lower income earners. But that tax mechanism only gets you so far. Really, if you want to really materially lower income inequality in Canada, what you really need to do is break down the barriers that are facing Canadians. And that means breaking down the barriers that are preventing women, newcomers, people of color, disabled Canadian, Aboriginal and First Nations people, all of the groups that are having that face greater challenges to success. If we can break them down, we will actually reduce income inequality. And literacy isn't the silver bullet that'll solve it all, but it's an important component of a platform trying to reduce inequality. I think at the government level, there is a bit of a challenge that when we talk about literacy, in a sense, provinces are responsible for education, and the federal government is responsible or has programs around skills. So it's sort of like, I'm going to generalize, but it's like adult skills is a federal issue, and children or youth skills is a provincial issue. And one of the problems we have in Canada from a federation point of view is that when you have governments at different levels responsible for something, you often don't see the progress that you want, because each side will basically say, well, that's the responsibility. Like we can't trot on the responsibility of the provinces. Oh, we can't, the immigration is a federal issue, so the provinces can't engage on immigration. So I think that that's also a policy challenge. Now, what we're seeing right now is the federal government, the newly elected federal government is going to push forward with their early learning and childcare plans. And that really is like going into a space that is predominantly a provincial jurisdiction. So it actually shows you that, and eight provinces have now signed agreements with the federal government to participate in those in the early learning and childcare programs and receive federal funding. So what that's really telling you is we can collaborate, right? If it's deemed to be important enough, we collaborate. So I think that there is the appetite for bolder, stronger policy to improve literacy in Canada, but I think we sort of have to approach it in terms of linking it to solving, not just literacy, solving other big issues facing Canada. And then the last component is on the business side, and this one really gets me frustrated and quite agitated, because basically businesses complain that the education system isn't generating work-ready employees, but businesses, if you look at training budgets, in inflation-adjusted terms, budgets or training budgets in Canada are exceptionally low, right? So really, it's like if we went back in time, businesses invested more in training of their workers, right? And what I've observed in terms of training programs is that businesses in Canada will pay for specific skills training, but they won't pay for general skills training. So if I go to my employer and say, hey, I need to know how to use this specific piece of software to do my job, the business will often say, yeah, okay, we'll pay for a training program. But if you go to a business and say, I want to improve my my language skills, businesses often are very resistant to paying for that sort of training, which again so that's where you have a market failure, and that means there is a role for government to play to step forward and invest in this space. So when we hear about federal provincial programs to upskill the workforce, I really think that literacy needs to be part of that program, because technical higher level technical skills, you might be able to get business training funding, but for general skills and language skills, that's not where businesses are willing to invest, even though there's a huge payoff to the business by doing that sort of investment. So I don't have a solution to it, but it's a major hurdle.
So that's a lot to digest. Thank you so much for that. You did mention one thing I'll revisit if we have time, and that's early childhood education, but I want to involve Annie now for a moment. Annie, so we've heard about partnerships and with business and other things. We've heard about policy. I'm wondering, first of all, you're welcome to comment on either of those, but I'm also curious about, we're talking a lot about literacy as it applies to people who may be looking for jobs, and that's certainly a big part of what we're doing, and it's obviously connected to the economy. I wonder though if in this conversation we might be missing some of the people who aren't considerably job ready. Perhaps they are at the very lowest levels of literacy, and maybe their goal is a little different than a job. Or do we run the risk of leaving them out if we focus too much on the economy? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. I do. So it's important that when we talk about economic recovery, we're looking to larger systems change in order to make sure that societal benefits are broadly shared. And according, and a quote from one of the UN's most recent economic impact reports was that the negative effects do not fall disproportionately on those who lack the resources to cope and recover. So I think when we talk about the economy, it's a complex issue that interweaves a lot of social issues. And I just want to also raise the awareness that we need to be aware of how our modern economic systems have disadvantaged many. An example being First Nations people in Canada, whose land has historically been exploited for natural resource use to build the economy while systemically marginalizing people, both socially and economically, in the name of growth or rising standards of living that have generally only benefited specific groups of people. So long-winded way of saying that we really do need to promote equal access to opportunities and reduce inequality, not just through formal, what we consider formal economic systems that we're familiar with and that are operating right now, but also supporting new forms of collective representation and ensuring those who work and live outside of the formal sector have a voice. If all of this makes sense, if all of that makes sense, it's important to support people that are a broad diversity of people, not just people who might be contributing to the economy. Does that answer your question, Stephen?
Absolutely, it does for sure. Mel, you wanted to jump in.
Yes, thank you, Annie. When I was hearing you, this is very interesting. And when I was hearing you, I was thinking of one initiative that shows that when businesses and or different community organizations or sectors collaborate, we can achieve great success in reaching out to people that are harder to serve or harder to reach, just because of, again, geographic situations or because of the general context or situation. So I know there's some partners that are watching here, but for the past 2 summers, a lot of the national and provincial organizations from the literacy sector have actually partnered with the food bank sector. So we were able last summer during the first COVID summer and this past summer to actually collaborate or establish a strong partnership between, again, food banks, literacy sector, to be able to reach families in their neighborhoods at their local food banks and to distribute books so that kids and families could keep on Reading On this summer. The actual name of the program was Read On Canada. But yes, so I'm very proud of the fact that Frontier College and other organizations were able to put this initiative together, because really, again, the impact was great. Free books distributed all across Canada, up north as well, through collaborations that were very efficient, and again, education and food. We don't necessarily always think, okay, let's partner and do something together. But yeah, when we start thinking of, well, who are you reaching? How are you reaching them? What are we trying to accomplish? If we take the time to sit down between sectors, and that could be with businesses as well, we can accomplish great things in terms of impact and in terms of reaching out to the hardest to serve.
You raised
Stephen, could I jump in terms of like the question about, could we excessively focus on the economy? And first of all, I'm going to flag something in the comments section that's been scrolling past, because I've been watching all the interesting commentary. And Scott Murray has posted a couple of times that there was a 2020 study that actually showed an even more positive impact of increasing literacy on job creation and output and productivity. So it looks like, when I'm saying, it could add 1 million jobs, it could create 100 billion in income. Consider that a low estimate, because it looks like the latest numbers are even higher. But to your point, Stephen, we need to be careful on how, when we talk about the economy, what do we mean, right? Because there is an obsession, particularly within economics, that we talk about measures, policy actions that increase growth, as if increasing economic growth is the objective. And we measure economic growth by something called gross domestic product, GDP. And so everything is about, how much does this add to GDP? Well, GDP is actually not the objective. It shouldn't be the objective, right? It's a means to an end, right? What we really want, and what we want to, the real goal is increased prosperity, right? And so what we really want is an increase in the standard of living of Canadians, right? And so when you think about economic prosperity, you take the sort of the broader definition of, like, you want to improve living standards. Let's understand that everyone in Canada actually contributes to that in some way, right? Like, so it can be workers that are earning labor income, but it can also be workers that are in unpaid jobs, right? It can be people who are doing things in the home. It could be, retirees that are still contributing to their local community, right? And all of this has implications from an economic performance point of view, right? There's a very strong relationship between, healthy communities and a rising standard of living, right? And so I think we need to be mindful. Like, I am very sensitive to, excessively focusing on just GDP and jobs, right? Because I actually think the economy is far broader than that. And it's, there is a reason why the economics is a social science, right? It's actually about people. And, we can't have a healthy economy if we don't have a healthy society. And again, this goes back to the argument around literacy and breaking down barriers and, helping people realize their potential, right? And that's the inclusive growth we're talking about. So when I'm recommending, like, we invest in literacy, increased literacy skills, I'm not just purely talking about this from a point of view of let's increase productivity and GDP.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions coming in, and I'll remind people that you can use the QA function via Zoom, or you can email to literacy@frontiercollege.ca, or you can tweet to @frontiercollege. So I'm going to start with a question, and we can continue chatting in and around the questions. But one person has asked, how do we get a holistic funding model? Family literacy provides intervention for adults and prevention for children. And so what I'm assuming that the question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that how do we get funding to support not just one person, but families, or maybe by extension communities? So a holistic approach. And I'll just say that we did some research at Frontier College a few years ago on the connection between literacy and poverty. And one of the chief recommendations was that we do look at programming in a holistic way so that it's not piecemeal. So I quite appreciate the point behind the question. Is there someone in particular who would like to jump in with that and make a response? Mel, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Well, just briefly, I want to say that, referring back to what I was talking about earlier, if we want funding models to be changed and to be impactful and to be holistic, again, we need to work to have coalitions, to work to have multiple sectors working together to approach governments, so that governments and inform them of yes, the literacy sector working on literacy will have some impact, but if suddenly we partner with another sector of the society or the economy, call it as you wish, we could double that impact and reach even more people. So I think, to me, the solution is always collaboration, partnership, cross-sectoral interventions. Again, or a simple way to say it is exactly what this person was about: holistic or wraparound programming, but also coalitions that will together approach governments. I really feel that if, for example, Frontier or another organization goes to lobby or have discussions with a provincial, territorial, or federal government, we will get somewhere for sure. But if we are 10 voices together, I think we have more chances to actually have systemic changes, and that includes to have an influence or to have an influence on how the funding models are being deployed and created.
An interesting example you gave a moment ago of the collaboration between food security agencies and literacy. And I know from having worked in food security in the past, some of our clients would occasionally tell us, you need to get your act together. And I would say, what do you mean? And they said, well, okay, you've got a food program on Monday afternoons, and down the road, there's a reading program on Monday afternoons, and then there's an employment preparation program on Monday. Couldn't you people just get together and talk and offer one on Monday morning, one on Monday afternoon, and one on Tuesday? You know what I mean. Annie, I'm sorry, I'm catching you in the middle of your glass of water, but I saw you sort of shaking your head in support of what Mel was saying. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree with Mel. It's largely in part of collaboration, and it's something that I feel Frontier College, that's always at the heart of our work with communities and finding solutions. I also wanted to point out and kind of pivot back to the issue of early childhood education about programming that's holistic and has rewards that benefit multiple people in society in multiple ways. And I know that Craig has done a lot of economic reports on early childhood education and the economic impacts of that. And I also wanted to say we have a really interesting example of how early childhood education is being taken up in BC and the programs with which we work. So a few years ago, BC came out with the early childhood learning framework. I probably said that wrong. But in addition to us understanding that literacy, if it's introduced early on, has big implications for adult literacy learning. In addition to that, and in addition to maybe what Craig can speak about the economic impacts, it's also a time, that gives parents, if there's adequate childcare, it gives parents the opportunity to participate in society in other ways that they see fit. It also, early childhood is a platform not only for literacy learning, but to start to dismantle some of the barriers that we see developing in schools around systemic inequality. There's a really great network of pedagogists right now who are working in informal and formal settings in BC that are going in and starting to weave together communities and collaborating with Indigenous groups and school systems to integrate to integrate all of this interconnected knowledge. It's the Early Childhood Pedagogy Network. We have a group of really dedicated tutors right now actually working with a community organization called the Connects Family Education Center, who are training adults to complete their early childhood education certificates. So a lot of these people who are getting these certificates are newcomers, are highly skilled, but lack the literacy skills needed for this certificate. And we're able to support them in getting jobs in this realm. So, I think early childhood in particular is one of the programs that has a ripple effect. So when we're talking about holistic funding, we also should be thinking about what are holistic programs and how can we incorporate more of those into the work that we do.
So Craig, I told you a moment, Mel, did you want to have a final word on that subject?
This really quickly, building on what you were talking about, Annie, when we talk about program models, holistic program models, models that I've seen or programs that I've seen deployed where either parents or grandparents are actually even we could see them as learners, but they're actually the teachers or the people doing the interventions with the children. For example, I'm thinking of an example in Sherbrooke, Quebec. We have teenagers that we recruit, we train, we pay actually. They're often just recently arrived in Canada, and still learning French as a second language, but we train them and we support them so that they become literacy models or literacy agents within their communities, and they work with the little ones, little brothers, sisters, cousins, neighbors, So I just wanted to mention that I really think you're right, Annie, that holistic programming is very important. And often we can see it's even more impactful when we can use parents and other family members as the role models and the agents within their that are doing the interventions within their milieu de vie. I'm sorry, it's coming in English, in French, but within their living environment. There you go.
Thank you, Mel. Important points. Craig, the concept of early childhood education has come up a few times. We actually have a question about it. I'll get that to a set in a minute, but you're actually a bit of a recent authority on this. You just did some research for a good partner organization of ours, the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation, and it was on the value of early childhood education as it applies to literacy. And that sort of dovetails nicely to a question we have from Edmonton about, is there research being done on the effect of COVID on children 0 to 5 in terms of their learning and their literacy? So I'll sort of roll that all in together as one intro for you. Maybe you can tell us a little about your research for the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation, and then are you aware of anything about the impact on that age group from COVID?
Sure. Let me answer the COVID angle first. And the answer is no, simply because COVID happened so rapidly that there hasn't been the time to actually collect the data and then analyze data on the impact that it's having on people. Like this is one of the challenges the pandemic has created. The speed at which the economy collapsed, and then the volatility associated with the reopening, where we had multiple waves hitting the economy and different provinces being hit in different ways. Then you go to Statistics Canada, and when they published the provincial economic accounts, they're a year out of date, right? They're a year before, right? The only data that we have that's very high frequency is things like employment, right? So when we get into questions like what has COVID actually done, right, to our young people, right, and impacted their skills development, I intuitively know it has set kids back. Like I know that, but we don't have the data, and we probably actually won't be able to do that sort of analysis in the near term. Like it'll actually take some time before we'll be able to prove what we actually all know, right? And that's a real challenge, right? I'm currently working on a project with Zita Cobb from the Shorefast Foundation in Fogo Island, who's running a pilot project on how to build resilient community economies. And one of the core findings is there's very little data, like there's very limited data to really understand what's happening to communities, particularly in the pandemic, given how recent it's been and how rapid things have changed. So unfortunately, it's going to take us some time to actually sort that out. But from a policymaker point of view, I think there is a strong appreciation that the disruption to childcare, the disruption to the education system, has had a detrimental impact, and could set kids back significantly, and we need to overcome that. There's something in economics that's called hysteresis, which is when a shock that hits you permanently changes the trajectory, right? And so one of the things that's observed is young people that graduate during a recession actually have their career path set back significantly over their entire lifespan. Like for many kids that graduate in a recession, they don't have the same opportunities. They end up in jobs that don't really use their skills, and as a consequence, their starting path for their career is altered, and it some catch up and some don't. And I think that's what way we have to think about the pandemic as well. Like eventually we're going to get data that's going to show that the impact that the pandemic had on women, the job losses have predominantly been in low income jobs, which has impacted our most vulnerable segments of our labor force, which includes women, youth, people of color, Aboriginals, disabled Canadians. There's like all of the vulnerable populations, they've actually experienced more of the job losses, and they're going to experience more of the impact that COVID has had, the disruption that COVID has had. So we really need to focus on, okay, how once again do we overcome that? And this is sort of the notion of building back better, which is we had a literacy problem before the pandemic, right? The pandemic has now shown us areas of weakness in our economy, including things like childcare and early learning. We actually were underinvesting in early learning before the pandemic. The pandemic has now shown us we didn't do a good job, on that front. And it's really critically important that early learning and childcare is actually social infrastructure that the economy needs. As a consequence, as we think about where we put our public dollars, as we try to build back better, we have the opportunity to address the shortfall, right? And I think literacy is in the same camp. And when we were talking earlier about, like when Annie was talking about the partnering with other groups, like I completely agree with the notion that we all need to collaborate, or different groups serving, trying to overcome various issues need to collaborate. And this is actually what I was trying to get at to a certain degree about the notion of tying literacy to other issues, right? Like you want to reduce poverty? Well, literacy can help you with that, right? You want to improve the skills development of kids, and you want to create a more resilient labor force of the future? Well, investment in child literacy can do that. You have labor shortages today that are creating real problems for businesses? Well, literacy can help you with that, right? You want to have an intelligent, informed dialogue on climate change, right? Having a higher, having a population with a higher literacy, means they're more likely to be able to engage in public discussion on such a big issue, right? You want, the latest election had incredibly low voter turnout. You want to improve voter turnout? Well, it turns out that voter turnout correlates to literacy skills, right? People with stronger skills are more likely to go out and vote because they're more involved in understanding the issues around them and they have a view on the issues around them.
So
right?
to paraphrase it, you said earlier, literacy might not be the silver bullet, but it connects to everything. Is that a good way to say it?
I defy you to come up with something I can't tie literacy to.
All right. Well, I won't take you up on the challenge, but
but it drives home the point, right?
Yes.
Like this is such a foundational skill set. If we can't get this right, it holds us back in a lot of other areas, right? And literacy isn't going to, on its own, solve any of them. But boy, it's an important part of addressing any of these issues.
I couldn't agree more. Mel, we had a question that connects to a program I happen to know we have in Southwestern Ontario. The question is, what are the views on supporting the migrant population to learn and develop literacy skills? And I know that's not specifically your program, but maybe at a high level, you could just say a few words about it.
Of course, it's very important to support migrant workers. If we're talking about migrant workers that are here for a certain period of the year, right, Stephen?
Presumably, yes.
Yes, okay, presumably. We know that it's very hard. We were talking about the labor shortages earlier. We need to feed people in the cities. We need to feed people in rural areas. And it's very hard and getting harder to recruit, Canadians or residents of Canada to, pick up fruit and take fruit and vegetables and working in the agricultural sector. So as we all know, we have a lot of the workers that are working in the agricultural sector are coming from other countries. And one could tend to think, okay, well, they're coming here, they're making their money, they're going back home. Why would we care about supporting them, helping them learn, increase their literacy skills? If we want to be able to keep this workforce, well, I will say to this that if we want to keep these workers safe, if we want them to be able to continue to do their job and to come here and be productive. So I talked about safety, productivity. We need to be able to support them in their skills, literacy skills, acquisition, if I can say, or improvement. We have a program, yes, in Southern Ontario, where at Frontier College, where we have, we call them laborer teachers. This is actually one of our founding programs, where we have people, working during the day in the farms, doing the same work than the migrant workers, but at night and on weekends, they teach them literacy skills or English as a second language. And the benefits of that, we see them because employers, again, that will let Frontier College or other programs work into farms will say that their workers are more efficient, but also they tend to be more motivated. They know their employer cares about their welfare because they're investing in a literacy program. So that makes workers also that have less absenteeism. No one's sick today. Everyone's at work because we're going to have a hard day working. But at night, we know that Miriam, for example, will be teaching us a bit more English. So it's a very again, this type of program shows us that when employers invest into their workforce, whether they're migrant workers or other types of workers, it pays off. And I think Craig had alluded to that a bit earlier in the conversation.
Annie, I've had a question that a couple of things I thought you might be willing to address. One is we talked quite a bit earlier on in the discussion about those people that we're having trouble reaching. A couple of speakers said, well, there isn't broadband access, there isn't computer equipment, and it's not just in isolated areas, it's in major cities. What are we doing to reach people under those circumstances at the moment? They certainly still need our support.
Sure. There's a lot of, it is shocking that in a city like Vancouver, there is still such a huge divide between access and equity regarding digital technology. On the same hand, there's many groups, but a few that I know of in particular that are doing amazing work that we're involved with in some capacity. I'll just give a shout out to the UBC Learning Exchange. They run digital tech cafes where they will train a community member to support helping people with understanding their cell phones, where to access internet. They'll go out into the community, into libraries, parks, where they're community centers where they're needed, and just be there for people to access in the ways that they need support. We were inspired by that model, and again have been partnering. This is something I mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation, but have been partnering with the Burnaby Neighborhood House, so in the community next door, to support their adult learning and to support programs that are very similar. And then in addition to that, doing outreach of we just barely hired someone to train them to do outreach to communities, particularly a community where we run a homework club, where we've seen this huge access issue with parents not being able to communicate with parents if we're not in person with them. So we get to have this person go and help that community's parents be there in person, show them, how to set up an email if that's a barrier, how to communicate with our homework club coordinator so they know, and if they're not there in person, how they know that they can communicate with us and get educational support for their learners. I think another thing that we should consider is not just formal channels of education. I think the most innovative ways of support that we've been finding, certainly over the last year, have been kind of informal gatherings and informal channels of educational support. Another example is we partner with it's called the Multicultural Family Center. They have a Middle Eastern women's group, and once a week they meet for English conversation, period. It's just a practice. It's not a course. It's not a class. It's just a place to gather and practice English. And we have phenomenal multilingual volunteer coordinators who take into account what these women who are newcomers to Canada are wanting to learn, and then provide the resources to them, to practice that language that surrounds everyday life. I just dropped into one of their classes recently, and they were talking about what it's like to go to a doctor appointment. What vocabulary do you need to know to go to a doctor appointment? What vocabulary do you need to know if you're calling your child's school? So again, it's not a formal class. There's not a set curriculum. It's not being channeled into any direct job, but it's building these skills at every level to support people where they are.
Thank you so much. Mel, I note that you have the word impact in your title, programs and impact. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. When we all went off-site and we all said, when I say we, I mean the whole country, the whole communities at large, we're trying to figure out how can we help people digitally who we used to see in person. Well, a lot of us wondered, well, will digital tutoring work? I mean, we know the mechanics of it can work, although, as we were just saying with Annie, not 100% of people have access. But for people who do, a lot of people at the time said, well, of course we'll do this, but what if it doesn't work? What if it's not as effective as face-to-face? And we had when the pandemic started, I guess 119 years experience with face-to-face, so we knew what worked. What have we learned? Do you know anything about digital tutoring and its impact, its effectiveness?
It's a very good and important question, Stephen, and I actually have an answer for you. About this. At Frontier College, we have an evaluation framework. It's been years that we use a framework to measure the impact that we have on our learners, whether they're being children, youth, or adults. So we had a lot of data already about the efficiency or the impact that we had on our learners pre-pandemic, so with our face-to-face programs. And we have been working with a group of external evaluators for some years too. They actually helped us develop our original, impact evaluation framework. So when the pandemic hit and we had to pivot the majority of our programs online, we actually approached them again and said a few months in, would you help us measure the impact of our tutoring activities online to see if, first of all, if we're, making a difference, to see if we're supporting the children and youth that we're working with the right way, but also, to inform our practice. And we were learning as we were going, right? So this was really important to us to know, yes, if we were having impact, but also what we had to tweak and change to have to increase our impact. And so with the group of evaluators, we conducted a study or an evaluation of our online tutoring. And at the end of year one of the pandemic, if I can say so, last April 2021, they came out with a report. And Stephen, we were so pleased to see that when they actually did a comparison of pre-pandemic face-to-face, during pandemic online, and the measures, so the indicators were about the same, the measures of success. So we were having as much impact online than in person with children and youth. Actually, there was one or two measures that where we saw an increased impact with our digital tutoring. So that was very important, interesting to us. And one of them that I want to underline is the fact that children and youth acquired better self-confidence or confidence in their skills once they went through a Frontier College program that was delivered online. So that was a measure where there was a gain, actually. It was more impactful to have delivered this on the self-confidence to have delivered a program online for participating children. I tend to explain this by the fact that it was a pandemic, kids were out of school. So sometimes, except for mom and dad and brother and sister, the only other significant person that you would see and your teacher would be, your Frontier College tutor. So I think this helped the one-on-one connection online, the special attention to the child or the youth that was given through that one-on-one connection, I think had an impact on the increased self-confidence. So I want to say that because it was a pandemic too, we have to we're actually continuing to evaluate the impact of our digital tutoring programs. And I think the second round of data will give us even clearer information, because I think everyone was so in shock in 2020, so maybe we have to be careful how we interpret this data, because it was such a different setting and context. But now that we're in year two, I really look forward to see in a few months what are the gains again, and if the measures are staying the same, or if there's gains in one way or another with our digital tutoring.
So good to hear. To think of the last couple of answers combined, there are ways to help people who can't access digitally, but for people who are able to, the programs apparently are as effective as face-to-face, at least in the early analysis. So those are both good pieces of information. We did get a question from Bridget Hayes. I think most of you, almost everyone in literacy knows Bridget. She has a question, and I don't know, it might be specific, Craig. I don't know if anyone's examined this. How has the pandemic affected the distribution of literacy skills within the workplace? She says typically lower literacy levels are found in lower skilled jobs, yet these are the jobs without workers, many of whom may have left the workforce. So I don't know if you have an answer to that.
Unfortunately, it's going to be similar to the other answer around COVID, right? That we don't have data on the job losses impact on the labor market by literacy. Having said that, when you look at the outcome, the labor market impact that has happened, the question, the intuition that's in that question is absolutely right. So disproportionately, the jobs that were lost during the pandemic were at the lower end of the income distribution. And as a consequence, a higher share of those jobs are going to be, a higher share of the employment loss that we had was in unskilled or semi-skilled labor, which would correlate with people that on average, and this is doing a generalization that you always need to be very careful about, but I would expect that on average, you would see people with lower literacy capabilities being in that category. And what we've seen is high skilled workers were much less affected. And in fact, we've actually seen a lot of growth in demand and employment for higher skill jobs. So when you look at the composition of, from an industry point of view, where you can see job losses, well, you can see them, or job gains. We've seen them predominantly in financial services, professional services, healthcare, education, IT, like information technology, digital, probably should have been, the first in this category. And on average, you're going to find higher literacy skills in many of the workers in those sectors. And then at the bottom end of the scale, you have, where's the job losses been? Well, it's been in accommodation, food services, tourism, culture, and from a full-time versus part-time split, more of the job losses were in part-time jobs, and people with lower literacy skills are more likely to be in part-time jobs or actually be holders of multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. So we know that, again, when you start listing like sort of the sectors and the jobs that are in those sectors, and you see the job losses, you also expect that you're going to see more job losses for women, people of color, newcomers, etc. So, Aboriginal and Indigenous people as well. So what we can actually see is that this shock impacted our sort of most vulnerable workers more. And I would argue that low literacy skills are going to be more concentrated in that group, right? So I'm sure that down the road, when we actually have good data, we'll be able to talk about this in a more informed way. I'm absolutely convinced that the data will support this, like no question about it. But we do have, we won't have definitive numbers. But this also leads to one other comment that, like a small tangent, which is, and I've been trying to follow the like, this is the best chat going on during a presentation I've ever seen. And I've spent an awful lot of time on Zoom, Teams, etc. type calls. I don't know if there's a way that after this session we can get a copy of what was captured in the chat, because there's some absolutely fantastic links going in to the chat function around good sources for data and information. One of the comments that keeps coming up in the chat function in different ways is really around measuring the impact, right? That I think one of the problems we have is we don't actually have good data on the impact of literacy programs. And in some cases, we could actually improve literacy programs in Canada by reducing some of the range of quality of programs that we have in Canada. Like if we had good data on which programs have the greatest impact and have the most positive effect in improving skills, well, that would probably help, the delivery and improvement of literacy with the money that's already currently available. I don't think we actually have enough data on, I don't actually think we have enough data in this space, right? Like every time I do research on this, I end up going back to the same sort of sources, a very finite, limited data set. So I don't think literacy gets as much attention when it comes to data coverage. And I think that's a challenge, because I think particularly with governments running massive deficits, when you want to go in and make the case that you please invest more in my cause, right? Your pitch is going to resonate more if you have data to back up. If you give me this much money, this is the impact you will get, right? And this was something I could do with early childhood education in support of the early years studies and the McCain Foundation, that we actually had some decent numbers that we could really work with to sort of show policymakers, if you invest in early learning and childcare, this is the rate of return you're going to get on your investment. And I know we'll get chat comments about it's more than about just money and dollars, but if you actually want to get a politician to make your case, or you want a public servant to support your request for funding, the more data you have, the stronger your case and the more likely you're going to be successful, right? So that's an important element. The last thing, and maybe people can tell me this in the chat, because I don't know the answer to this one, but I was very upset when the funding to literacy programs across Canada was cut significantly, before the first term of the federal Liberal government. And my understanding is a lot of the literacy research framework actually was dismantled because the funding disproportionately, the funding shifted to being only programs that delivered, or the funding went, almost exclusively to groups that were delivering programs, and there was, money for doing research, or money for groups that were, coordinating between literacy organizations. All that framework lost funding, and I don't know whether there's been any restitution of funding in this space. But at the time, it upset me, because as a policy wonk and a researcher, I want to make evidence-based decisions, and I want evidence to support the policy recommendations we're making. And so I think actually cutting funding away from the literacy community to stop, money going to things that were perceived as overhead costs, and just fund program delivery, I think was very short-sighted. And if it hasn't been restored, I think it's something that we absolutely need to look at.
Greg, thank you. And by the way, I have been informed that I apologize, I haven't been able to monitor the chat, but I have been informed we will make it available to people afterwards, so that we can others can follow the train of thought that was happening. So we've only got a few minutes left, and I thought what I would do is perhaps ask our panelists if they have any final thoughts they'd like to share. So maybe in 2 minutes or so, you can what would you like people who are taking part today to know? Let's just leave it at that. And Mel, I'm going to thank you again for filling in. You've been exceptional, and I know you didn't know you would be on the panel until an hour before it started, so I very much appreciate your flexibility. So how about we start with you? What would you like to leave our attendees with?
I think I started with that, Stephen. So I'll repeat what I said at the beginning, but almost call it a call to action. I really think that the key, whether it's to, referring to what you were saying, Craig, to reinstate funding for research in the literacy field, whether it is to have for organizations to have the means to evaluate their own work, to see if they're having impact, but also to inform their practices and their programs, or whether it is to just make sure that we're starting to we can, will I say influence? Yeah, that we can talk to governments at all levels and get them excited, even if I can say, about the literacy issue, because they can see how, yes, it benefits their economies, but also because if they invest in the sector, or in a group of, anyway, if they invest in the sector, they'll see the benefits at all levels. I'm not going to rename them, but housing, employment, poverty reduction, etc. We didn't talk about crime prevention today, but that's another one. I think there was someone talking about that in the chat earlier too. So if we work together, and when I say together, I'm talking about across sectors, within sectors, across sectors. And again, we have to go get the businesses. We have to have the business sector on our side. If I talk here to my colleagues from the community sector or the nonprofit sector, we have to really work together, get governments on board if we want to solve this issue. And again, is it the expression that you use, the silver bullet, or anyway, if we solve this literacy issue, or we reduce the literacy issue in Canada, I think we're going to make gains on all fronts. Of course, like it's not, I think, we know we will. So I don't know what it means concretely. I think that today we saw it through the chat. It's not just people from the literacy sector that are here. So I love to see that there's a multiplicity of actors that are around, their screen today. So I don't know if people have suggestions in the chat, like, so what next? We know, we talked about the issues. We have some kind of ideas for solutions. How do we bring those to life together? This is the question it's kind of pending here, but I think, yeah, call to action is my ending word. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mel. Craig, I'm going to give you 90 seconds. Go ahead.
Look, it's been a real pleasure. Many of the people that are on this call are already strong literacy advocates. You know, I often start presentations like in person with, okay, so show me a show of hands. You know, how many of you think Canada has a literacy problem that needs to be addressed, right? And then every arm goes up in the room, and you go, right, you're the wrong audience, right? Because, you know, within the literacy community, there's a strong awareness of how important, how impactful literacy is. I think the real challenge we have is elevating public awareness and then engaging with all levels of government to make progress in this file and make the case for increased investment. Because I do defy you to come up with a problem we have in Canada today that literacy wouldn't help solve. And for those of you on the call today who are far more expert about this topic than I am, you know, I hope that the dialogue has provided you with some new ideas on how to articulate the case for investments in literacy. So thanks again.
Craig, thank you. So Annie, that leaves the final word to you. What do you have to say in a minute or so?
Yes, thank you, everyone on the panel. It's been a pleasure talking with you and discussing these things. And I'm trying to keep my eyes on the side chat, and there is so much happening. And I wish we could just continue this conversation longer. But as a takeaway that hasn't already been said, I think it's just important that we all continue to acknowledge how interconnected of an issue literacy is and how much it does come down to inequalities in society. So continually interweaving that notion, those understandings into the work that we're actively doing on the ground or within our institutions to combat some of the inequality that we're experiencing, and some more than others. So we'll continue to do that on the ground here in BC, and I know across Canada with Frontier College.
Well, thank you, Annie. And let me add my thanks to all of our panelists, and a huge thanks to everyone who joined us today. It felt like we got to a lot of topics, and again, I wasn't able to see the chat all the time, but I thank you for being so passionate and interested about this. I guess the actual final word rests with me. So let me again thank the panelists. Thank you for coming. I want to thank our generous sponsor. The forum is funded in part by the Government of Canada's Adult Learning, Literacy and Essential Skills program, and we very much appreciate their investment in this discussion. And a reminder that this has been taped, and you will be able to see it. Eventually, it'll be connected to our website. And I will just say a word of thanks to some of our staff, Jen, Karen, and Meredith, who helped put this together. And I will conclude by saying it looks to me like there's a strong economic argument for literacy. There's a strong human argument for literacy. And judging by the conversations we've had today, it's going to take a lot of work, but we're stronger together than apart. And I look forward to working with every one of you. Thanks very much, and bye for now.